off this countdown, we have Arkwright, UK. For years, Arkwright was a popping coal mining area, but in 1988 they discovered that emissions of methane gas were seeping out from the ground beneath them. This was putting the lives of the residents at risk. Arkwright was then deemed too dangerous of an area to live in. As a result, the entire town had to be evacuated. Once everyone was out, it was destroyed to prevent people from ever living there again. Nowadays, there's not much left of the town, just an abandoned set of railway tracks and a plaque commemorating the area. In our 9th spot, we have Gilman, Colorado. Located in southeastern Eagle County, Colorado, Gilman was a beautiful town located on the edge of a cliff. But that wasn't the reason why this town was considered dangerous. Around 1984, the Environmental Protection Agency discovered hazardous levels of arsenic, cadmium, copper, lead, and zinc in the soil, surface, and groundwater of the area. It was so toxic that they demanded a full evacuation of the town. Now if you visit the area, you will see tons of signs warning trespassers. The signs say things like hidden and visible dangers, and risk of injury or death. Moving on at number 8, we have Dawson, New Mexico. Dawson was another area known for its mining. At the start of the 20th century, about 2,000 people lived in Dawson. Then in 1906, the mines were purchased by the Phelps Dodge Corporation. But on October 22nd, 1913, a terrible explosion occurred in the mine, and around 263 miners were killed. Then, 10 years later, on February 8th, 1923, another explosion occurred. 123 miners were killed in this explosion. The mines remained operational until the 1950s, when they were finally deemed unsafe and shut down. Shortly after, the area was abandoned. Now if you visit Dawson, all you will see are rows upon rows of white crosses representing all the lives that were lost in the accidents. Coming in at number 7, we have Port Arthur, Tasmania. Port Arthur was once home to what was deemed as an inescapable prison. In fact, it was often called Australia's Alcatraz. From 1833 to 1853, Port Arthur was a place for convicted British criminals, mainly the biggest and the baddest ones. But in 1877, the prison was shut down. And then in 1895 and 1897, devastating fires destroyed most of the land. But in the 1900s, the area was turned into a tourist attraction with hope that it could escape its tragic past and, bring more positive vibes to the area. Sadly, this was not the case. In 1996, a man named Martin Bryant killed 35 people and wounded 23 more. This massacre is considered the worst massacre in the modern history of Australia. Now the area is abandoned. Its only visitors are the tourists that come to marvel at its history. Making our way down the list at number 6, we have Pitcher, Oklahoma. Pitcher, Oklahoma was once a popular lead and zinc mining town. In fact, a lot of families lived there. But in the mid-90s, a third of the younger population suffered from lead poisoning and were experiencing cognitive issues as a result. But that wasn't even the reason why the town was abandoned. They kind of just brushed that off to the side. In fact, they continued living there until 2006. That's when it was discovered that 86% of the buildings there were pretty much going to collapse at any given time. In fact, one motorist died after driving into a huge hole in the ground. After that was discovered, the population dropped to only 20 people. People fled so fast. Okay, so they're okay with a slow death through lead poisoning, but they draw the line at collapsing buildings? I don't know, I would have fled that area as soon as they said it was toxic. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Bodie, California. Bodie, California used to be the home to 10,000 residents. The reason why this area was so popular was because it had 30 mines. From 1878 to 1881, it was a booming area, but it wasn't the safest area to live in. Street fights, shootouts, and murders would happen daily. Then in 1932, a huge fire devastated the town. It destroyed most of the area. By the late 40s, the town only had a couple of residents, but they all ended up mysteriously dying. 2 were murdered, and 2 died from a mysterious illness. By the 1950s, it was a complete ghost town, with the emphasis on ghost, because apparently tons of spirits now haunt the area. Moving on at number 4, we have Sichuan, China. Back in 2008, Sichuan was hit with a magnitude 8.0 earthquake, the Wenchuan earthquake. This earthquake completely destroyed the area and killed thousands of residents. In fact, it caused 2 high schools to completely collapse, killing all inside of it. The earthquake destroyed 80% of the area and many people fled. A couple months later, the area was hit again by another earthquake, causing even more casualties. The town was then completely deserted. But the tragedy doesn't stop there. In 2013, the town was hit with a terrible flood. Now it remains completely abandoned. Only from time to time do people visit the area to pay their respects. In our third spot, we have Oradour-sur-Glane. Located in France, Oradour-sur-Glane was once a beautiful place to live. However, during World War II, it was the site of a horrific massacre. On June 10, 1944, the town was stormed by soldiers, and 642 of the residents were killed. The town was targeted since they supported the French resistance. Men were machine gunned down, whereas women were locked inside of a church and killed by grenades and explosives. Furthermore, most of the buildings were burnt down and destroyed. There were very little survivors. Those who did survive fled the area, abandoning it completely. Now all that's left are burnt down buildings, piles of bricks, and rusted cars. In our second spot, we have Treese, Kansas. During the early 20th century, Treese was rich in ore deposits. In fact, it supplied much of the ore used during the World Wars. But mining had to be stopped by the 1970s. It was discovered that the town's air was deadly. It was polluted with lead and other toxins. The whole area was surrounded with tons of lead and zinc mining waste. Not only was the air dangerous, but the ground was too. Hundreds of cave-ins and sinkholes occurred there. It was such a polluted area that it wasn't safe to live in at all. In fact, if you went swimming in the swimming holes, you would go home with reddened skin from chemical burns. That's how polluted the waters were. And eventually it was discovered that most of the residents were getting sick from lead poisoning. The Environmental Protection Agency eventually forced everyone out, except for 2 people who refused to leave. One ended up dying back in 2016. Now the area is attempting to be decontaminated, but even if that was successful, I can't imagine people wanting to move back there. And in our number 1 spot, we have Ludlow, Colorado. Ludlow, Colorado was once known for its coal mining. However, in 1913, thousands of miners went on strike to protest their work and living conditions. Over 1,000 workers and their families camped out by the mine as part of the protests. But in April of 1914, the town was the site of a horrific massacre. The Colorado National Guard and the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company guards surrounded the camp and shot and killed the protesters. The whole camp was burned to the ground, and countless lives were lost. After the massacre, Ludlow became a ghost town.
Off our list, and at number 10, we have Pripyat, Ukraine, which was the city most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, an infamous incident that released a massive amount of radiation out into the world. The accident forced entire towns to abruptly empty out, and the area within a 19-mile radius of the plant was deemed uninhabitable for at least another 180 years. Absolutely insane. There are a ton of spooky photo ops, but the most famous is the decaying amusement parks. I mean, talk about creepy. How to visit the Chernobyl region is about 2 hours away, and tours range from private visits to multi-day itineraries. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure 1 day is enough for my itinerary. I don't need an itinerary because I'll remember what I'm doing and it's only lasting 1 day. At number 9, we have Kennecott, Alaska. Nearly 200 million worth of copper was processed in Kennecott, a self-contained mining town located in Wrangell Street, Ellis National Park, from 1911 to 1938. Well, according to the National Park Services, as these stories usually go, the residents cleared out once the copper resources started to dwindle, and most of the buildings now have been abandoned for over 60 years. Well, there is hope on the horizon. However, the NPS MTS acquired many of the Kennecott's buildings and lands in 1998 and hoped to restore some of the buildings like the post office and the general store for modern use. Well, do you want to see a cool and creepy photo? Well, our pick would be empty skating rinks, you guys are seeing an empty tennis court, or how about visit the NPS run visitor center, which is open from Memorial Day through Labor Day, where you can actually pick up brochures or arrange a guided tour with the park ranger. Kennecott's Recreational Hall, which is fully restored in 2004, which is also available to rent for events. Next up, number 8, Bodie, California. Now this is one old west ghost town you're looking for. Once home to 10,000 people, Bodie boomed in the late 1880s after gold was found in the hills surrounding Mono Lake. Not long after though, Bodie transitioned into a period of steady decline until reaching ghost status around 1915 according to California Department of Parks and Recreation records. So why is this city such in great shape today? Well, you could thank the state of California for adopting the town and turning it into a state historic park in 1962. Coming in number 7 on this list, Waiuta, South Island, New Zealand. In the early 1900s, miners built a town right on top of a whole lot of gold-bearing quartz rocks, which would go on to produce 750,000 ounces of gold from 1.5 million tons of quartz. I'm kind of seeing a theme here where gold is creating immense popularity and wealth before destroying the very places it was found. People mine the gold, and then when it's all done, they get the heck out of there, leaving the town abandoned. Well, by the 1930s, the town had its own hospital, police station, and post office, plus a population of 600. The isolated city thrived until the main mining shaft collapsed, and that was back in 1951, forcing residents to abandon their town. Today, the Department of Conservation works to preserve the remaining buildings and hiking trails around the site. The department even converted one of the buildings, the Waiuta Lodge, into a 30-bunk facility for school groups and campers needing overnight accommodations. It is said that the original signpost pointing to a mining industry that no longer exists make for a great photo. Folks venture westward from Reefton on State Highway 7 and keep following the signs for Waiuta onto an unpaved road until you reach the spooky destination. You can explore on your own using the unmarked trails or a book tour in advance through friends. I don't know what friends would escort you through a haunted town, but it doesn't sound like great ones. I think you need to lose them. Number 6, we're bringing you Oradour-sur-Glane, France. Warning, this is quite a dark story. On June 10th, 1944, German troops raided the village of Oradour-sur-Glane and murdered 642 men, women, and children. Is this real life right now? Well, National Geographic reports, after the massacre, the military set fire to the churches, barns, and homes, leaving behind only a few surviving residents. The village has remained untouched since the horrific accident, serving as a shrine to those who died that June day. Number 5, we got Pyramidion Svalbard, Norway. The archipelago of Svalbard, located between mainland Norway and the North Pole, is home to about 2,145 humans. Not a lot. 1,000 polar bears and one seriously bone-chilling ghost town, Pyramidion, named for the pyramid-shaped mountain looming nearby. Pyramidion came to prominence in the 1930s, when the Soviets took ownership of the area's coal fields and quickly began mining operations. After World War II, they started spending more money on the enterprise, building hospitals, cafeterias, and houses, all in the block-style fashion typical of the Soviet-era architecture. The biggest hit came in 1996 when an airplane flying from Moscow to Svalbard crashes en route, killing all 141 passengers on board, many of them Pyramidion residents. The tragedy slashed the morale, and it was fully abandoned in 1998. As for the site today, Rachel Newer of Smithsonian Magazine sums it up perfectly. It was as if several hundred people had abruptly stopped what they were doing and simply walked away. At number 4, we have Tamestown, Shanghai, China. China is a big fan of replica cities. In fact, Shanghai has 7 European-themed towns built to give wealthy residents a new place to call home. There's a Dutch-inspired canal-lined neighborhood, a Paris replica completed with a 300-foot Eiffel Tower, and even a slice of Sweden-inspired churches and Nordic houses included. But we're particularly fans of the Thames ghost town. A British copycat just 40 minutes from downtown Shanghai. Here you'll find a scale replica of the Christ Church, statue of Shakespeare and Winston Churchill, and even some familiar red telephone booths scattered here and there. As curiously cute as this mini city sounds on paper, well, it ended up being a complete failure. In fact, all of the 7 experimental towns are now pretty much abandoned. Well, how do you visit? Well, travelers are more than welcome to walk the cobblestone streets of all 7 replica cities. To get to the Thames town, they recommend taking the Shanghai Metro 9 to the Songjing Xingxing station, and because I'm pronouncing those words absolutely correct, you guys won't get lost. And then, if you make it to the station that I just said, you can take a taxi for the rest of the way, only about 2.5 miles away and about $2 USD. Finally down, in at number 3 for abandoned towns you shouldn't visit, we're talking about the Great Saltire, Utah. And if you find yourself in Salt Lake City, Utah, you'll probably hear about the Great Salt Lake, or the Dead Sea of America, where you can float on the water. Now, I must tell you that you'll encounter corpses of dead seagulls, swarming flies, and a putrid odor. If you take the plunge, there's no way to miss the Saltire, a huge building with Moorish domes that you can see at the same time when you can smell the stench. The Saltire that you see now is actually the 3rd one. The first one was built in 1893 in order to provide a safe venue for recreation for families. It became immensely popular with all kinds of events until its pavilion and few other buildings were ravaged by the fire in 1925. Although it was built a second time, it never achieved the same popularity. In a period marked by the Great Depression, World War II, and several mishaps, it finally got destroyed in an arson fire in 1970. The 3rd one was built in 1981, approximately a mile away from the original venue. But you kind of take away the whole history of it, so I can see why it never became as popular. Now, number 2 on this list, we have Silver City, Idaho, which was at one point one of the largest cities in Idaho. So just imagine one of the largest cities being abandoned. Imagine where I live in Toronto, I'm going out my door, and it's like, where did everybody go? Well, the town was established in the mid-1800s during the, well, you guys guessed it, the gold and silver rush of the western United States. By the 1880s, the town's population rose to 2,500 people. At its height in the 1880s, it was a gold and silver mining town with a population of around 2,500, and it had approximately 75 businesses. As mining in the area began to die down, so did the city. In 1942, the last mine in the area was closed. Well, you can still visit Silver City, which currently has around 70 buildings, including old churches, a hotel, and it has a lot of old homes that you can see. And finally, in at number 1, when it comes to the creepiest place in America, no one can miss Bannock Ghost Town because of its paranormal stories. This old mining town is located near Grasshopper Creek in Montana. The area is famous as a National Historic Landmark and operates as a state park in the US. The photos of this place are wild. Literally, it looks like the quintessential Wild Wild West. To enter Bannock, follow the easiest ways to get there. From Dillon, you can take the interstate highway route to quickly reach your destination. It was famous as a mining town, but then moved towards a visiting place, and gradually the town got empty from the residents before the 1960s. Now visitors come to explore the unlocked buildings.
In at number 10, we have Whitton Noom in Australia. So Whitton Noom was Whitton doomed when the health risks of asbestos were discovered. This small town, nearly 700 miles north of Perth in Western Australia, was Australia's only supplier of blue asbestos. Shut down in 1966 due to the health concerns surrounding asbestos, Whitton Noom is now a ghost town. Formerly there was a population of almost 10,000 people, but now just 6 residents live here, still refusing to leave. They initially ran a campground, guest house and gem shop for passing tourists, all of which have fallen into disrepair. Whitton Noom still stands, although the government of Australia doesn't want tourists to visit, so it's removed all of its signage. If you do find your way there, you may see many buildings from the 1940s to 1960s era in various states of decay. Plus, you'd be putting yourself at serious risk from asbestos inhalation. Next up, I feel a place that a lot of Call of Duty fans would absolutely love. We have Cope Hill Down in the UK. Creepy, yes. Abandoned, kind of. Ghost town? Most definitely. Cope Down is a Bavarian-style dummy village built in the Wiltshire countryside in England as a simulated backdrop for army training. So just to reiterate, this is a full-size model village with cars and decorations etc. used by the Ministry of Defence to practice shooting people as a response to war and terror threats. Is this creepy or cool? I guess both, kind of. When the MOD isn't here training, it just stands there, totally abandoned. In at number 8, we have Hashima Island in Japan. So you may recognize Hashima Island off the coast of the Nagasaki Peninsula in Japan as the lair of villain Raoul in James Bond's Skyfall. I mean, if villains are literally hanging out here, it must be creepy, right? Right. The island had a population of just over 5,000 at its peak in 1959. Many people living here were working in the undersea coal mines. As the coal supply depleted, many left the island by 1974, leaving behind some buildings which are actually fully intact today, including a 1930s apartment block. The abandoned town has featured on many TV documentaries such as British Channel 4's Life After People and 3Net's Forgotten Planet. Also used in James Bond's Skyfall movie, the island has gained a lot of attention, and now you can even explore it in all its creepiness and abandonedness on Google Street View. You can even go in the abandoned buildings. In at number 7, we have Pyramiden in Norway. Pyramiden means pyramid in various Scandinavian languages, and it's an abandoned Russian settlement on an island off the coast of Norway. Originally founded by Sweden, Pyramiden was sold to the Soviet Union in 1927. Closed in 1998, Pyramiden was a coal mining town with over 1,000 inhabitants. So according to scientists, the abandoned buildings will still be visible 500 years from now due to the low rate of decay in the cold climate. So many people call Pyramiden the abandoned city at the world's end, and from pictures, it certainly looks like it. It's also a very dramatic location due to its mountainous backdrop. I would actually really enjoy looking around out here for like historical interest. Apparently there are many pro-Lenin pieces of propaganda still existing in Pyramiden. In at number 6, we have Villa Epicuan in Argentina. This is such a creepy one. So Villa Epicuan was a tourist resort near Buenos Aires, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985. Now this meant that many homes and livelihoods had to be abandoned. Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuan became a sunken town, lost to the perilous tides. However, the waters began to recede in 2009, and now after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time white and stripped of paint, and a lot of quite possibly irreparable damage. The trees have even died after their time away from the sun, leaving ghostly, chalky looking twisted roots and leafless branches withering in the ground. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the banks of the water, but really, it actually looks like a really cool place to explore. Creepy, but cool. Keeping it watery at number 5, but taking it back a few millennia, we have Lion City of the Qiandao Lake in China. In 1959, the Chinese government decided to flood a valley in order to build a hydroelectric power station. Now this meant sinking the ancient Lion City, with parts of it built in around 200 AD. Some of the architecture is still standing underwater today, and it dates back 1,300 years. Now divers can explore this eerie and still almost intact city 131 feet below the surface. Next up, a ghost town with a very sad and bloodthirsty history. In at number 4, we have Belchite in Spain. So Belchite in Spain has a history of bloodshed. Having experienced 2 historical battles close to the town, in 1937 the Spanish Civil War came to the village. Over the course of 2 weeks, from August 24th to September the 7th, 1937, Franco's forces fought the Spanish Republicans in and around the town. Now this led scores of dead and much destruction. A new village was built nearby, leaving the old village as it was following the war. Hauntingly abandoned with decaying buildings and rusting cars, there's even a beautiful old church with a fallen-in roof that looks totally fascinating. This has even been used as film locations, including the really eerie Pan's Labyrinth. In at number 3, we have Oradour-sur-Glane in France. Amid the Nazi invasion of France in the Second World War, the village of Oradan-sur-Glane was the subject of a bloody massacre. On June 10, 1944, SS soldiers destroyed the village, killing 642 of its inhabitants. Now there was one sole survivor of the attack and 20 escapees. The SS rounded up the men and shot them in a barn, whilst they burnt the women and children alive in a church. Then French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the village remain intact as a memorial to those who lost their lives. Tourists can now visit the remains of the town. In at number 2 we have Spinalonga in Crete. Spinalonga is a Greek island off the coast of Crete with a very checkered history. Formerly part of the main island of Crete, but carved out during Venetian rule, Spinalonga has been invaded by both the Venetians and Turkish troops. Re-seized by Greece by the end of the 19th century, Spinalonga became a leper colony in 1903. Basically, this meant that all of the people who contracted leprosy nearby were torn from their loved ones and were shipped off to live and die on the island. Now Spinalonga is abandoned, but the buildings stand in partial ruin. The last inhabitant of the island left in 1962, leaving behind decades of sadness which tourists can still feel today, ringing through the empty houses and churches as they take tours of the island. So we have reached the number 1 spot of our creepy abandoned ghost towns, and what can it be than the sad story of Pripyat in Ukraine. The Chernobyl disaster is one of the saddest man-caused disasters and the most disastrous single nuclear accident in history. In 1986, Pripyat was evacuated after an explosion and a fire in a nuclear power plant released large quantities of radioactive particles into the atmosphere. So it's really not that possible to venture here as the risk of radiation is still very high. With a prior population of almost 50,000, Pripyat was evacuated in a day. Now this left hospitals, railways, homes, restaurants, shops and amusement parks in total abandonment. Now 30 years on from the disaster, the elements have started to claim the buildings, with grass and trees growing through them. This radiation-ravaged city looks set to stand as a sad reminder of the disaster that ultimately claimed over 4,000 lives.
At number 10 we have Garnet, Montana, USA. If I ever go to Montana, I'm gonna stick to eating steaks and walking around in the mountains. I think I'd rather run into a full-grown grizzly before I would end up in a town filled with ghosts. Well, actually no, if I run into a ghost, the worst thing that would happen is maybe it would scare me so bad I would leave a hot dookie in my fresh jeans. But a grizzly would literally turn me into hot dookie. If you want to run into the ghost of an old miner, this is probably the best place you can go visit. Garnet, Montana was built up during the gold rush, and men from all over the land with bigger dreams than brains would travel here to try and strike it rich, finding some shiny rocks. Well, we all know that eventually the gold rush dried up and Garnet, Montana didn't have much to offer after that. Now it's abandoned unless you count for the various spirits living at the residence. It's said that at certain times of day you can hear a ghost play the piano, which is probably the friendliest thing a spooky ghost can do. Oh, a ghost is like, oh, people are coming. I better play them a good tune so they know I'm not to be trifled with. And it's a hot spot for ghost lovers from all over the world. An average of 16,000 people a year come to check this place out. Someone should take a recording of that ghost piano song so Ariana Grande can mix it up and make a cool Halloween tune over it. At number 9 we have Hashima. Hashima is an island off the coast of Japan that used to be one of the most densely populated places on the planet. In the mid to late 1900s, it's thought that there were over 5,000 people living per square kilometer. The island was a hotspot because of the major underwater coal mine. Nothing like living next to a coal mine to really strengthen your lungs. It was a booming place until 1974 when the coal mine was gone. After that, people started to leave the island in troves. Now the entire place is deserted and there's just a shell of a city. It's almost scary to look at, like it resembles something out of an apocalypse movie. For years it was forbidden for people to visit the island, but now you can do tours in select areas. The ghost stories go deep as well. My favorite is of a little girl dressed all in white who stands on the beach. No one knows what she's looking for, but people think that her family abandoned her on the island because they couldn't afford to raise her. Now her ghost waits on the shore for her family to come back. That is sad. At number 8 we have Butugaychag in Russia. The story of this town is probably the worst fate you could ever meet. Between the years of 1945 and 1955, this place was a labor camp. So if you were arrested back then, they might send you up to this place to work in a mine. Now what was in this mine? Uranium! And what is uranium? Radioactive. And what do radioactive things do to human cells? Well, they rip them apart and you die one of the most painful deaths imaginable. It's thought that over 400,000 prisoners died at this camp from the terrible conditions. Working in the mine would literally cut your life expectancy down to months. And the land was previously thought to be cursed. When it was originally found by nomadic tribes, the herd of deer died from eating the grass there. We now know that was uranium poisoning. Now it's said that the place is plagued by the thousands of souls who experienced horrible, slow radiation sickness deaths. The town is now shut down and you could go there if you want to die in a few months, but I would probably stay away. At number 7 we have Bodie, California, USA. When we're talking about ghost towns, you can bet we're gonna cover a lot of places that used to be packed with shiny rocks, especially in America. If you were in the USA back in the 1800s and you weren't trying to dig up a bunch of rocks, then what were you doing? You were a huge nerd. What, did you spend your time trying to figure out a cure for smallpox? Get out of here, you dork! Well, Bodie is a big time gold rush town. It's estimated in the late 1800s Bodie was the second largest town in all of California with around 7,000 people. It really didn't take a lot to be a metropolis back then. You just needed a well, a good saloon, and then you were set. The gold deposit was found by the patriarch of the Bodie family. He didn't get to enjoy his findings though because he died in a blizzard not long after. His family built the town and then named it after him. It's said that his ghost still haunts the land. Probably because he's so salty he never got to get rich and fat off his findings. You can visit this town. It's known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in all of America. Because of the dry climate, the buildings are in great shape. At number 6 we have Oradour-sur-Glane, France. This ghost town is the site of one of the many horrible acts carried out by the Nazis. In 1944, everyone in the town was forced into buildings by Nazi troops. These buildings were then set on fire and anyone who tried to run for safety was shot. Out of the several hundred people who lived here, only 7 people survived. How did they do this? Well, they had to cover themselves in the dead bodies of their friends and family. Now the town has never been repaired. It stands as a symbol to remember those who lost their lives in the brutal attacks by the Nazis. And paranormal investigators have visited the site and they say it's plagued with tormented spirits. If you know anything about World War II history, you know that this isn't even scratching the surface when it comes to the horrific crimes committed by the Nazis. At number 5 we have Pripyat in Russia. This place used to be the most northern coal mine in the world, and even though it's cold as hell there and only 1,000 people live there, it was still an area under constant development. There was a hospital, schools, and a recreation center built for all the people who lived there. Throughout the 80s and early 90s it was thought that this town would continue to grow and eventually become a winter hotspot. But the mine eventually dried up in the late 90s and everyone had to pack up and take off. The town was completely abandoned until the late 2000s when tourists started heading up there to bring a little more life to the area. Now there's 20 residents who live there only in the summertime to work at the town's only hotel. This place isn't really high on my lists of must visits. I think I'm gonna hit up Turks and Caicos and get drunk on a beach before I freeze my toes off in a former coal mining town. Also, if you do plan on visiting this winter wonderland, the only hotel in town is said to be haunted. Strange noises can be heard at night and a tall black figure has been said to walk around the perimeter of the building. At number 4 we have Helltown, Ohio, USA. What a wonderful name. I heard they have an amazing cotton candy store and none of the schools have demons in them. Well, Helltown is a focal point of many conspiracy theories. The land was bought by the government years ago and all the people living there were told to leave. Speculation is this happened because there was a chemical spill and the government didn't want to admit their massive screw up. Now the town is left untouched, but there are rumors that there is a giant mutated beast created by the chemical spill that walks around the area. Not really haunted, but a giant monster's in the same vein. At number 3 we have Pripyat, Ukraine. If you guys are part of the most amazing top 10 family, then you probably know I put this place on a lot of lists, but it's hard to pass it up. Pripyat is the closest city to the Chernobyl nuclear plant, and it's no wonder why it's a ghost ghost town. Turns out people don't like dying an irradiated death. The disaster happened back on April 26, 1986, and it wasn't long after that everyone started running in the opposite direction. Now vegetation has taken over most of the town, but there are a few residents who have returned. But why is it haunted? Well, there is the Black Crow of Chernobyl, also called the Black Demon, Winged Creature, and many other names. It's said that this thing was seen on the day of the explosion, and some people believe that the demon himself caused the reactor to explode. Now the beast stalks the land, waiting for, I guess, another power plant to be built. I don't know what it wants. At number 2, we have Port Arthur, Tasmania. There are a few places in history that you can call hell on earth, but this is definitely one of them. Port Arthur was once the site of a brutal English prison. The worst criminals in Britain were exiled to this island, and it wasn't anything like getting sent to Club Med. I can promise you there wasn't a mojito in sight. The British government would practice psychological experiments on the inmates, and this was back in the 1800s, so you can only imagine lobotomies and other horrific practices were performed there. The living conditions were so horrible that inmates would kill each other so they could get the death penalty. I mean, you could cut out the middleman and just kill yourself, but to each his own, I guess. Now you can go on tours through the abandoned prison, and I don't think I need to explain to you why this place is haunted. And number 1 on our list is Poveglia, Italy. For our number 1 spot, we've picked a place that has centuries of grotesque history to go along with it. In the mid-12th century, this island was used as a place to dump people who were dying from the plague. Thousands of bodies were burned on this island, and going to the island was non-optional. If it was suspected that you had the Black Death, they sent you, and you stayed there until you suffered to death from this horrible sickness. After all this plagueness was done, it was a pretty chill spot until 1922, when a mental institution was built on the island. It's said that the head doctor would perform terrible experiments on all the people. He later went mad, and the shell of the institution still stands, and you can go visit it if you want. Also, fun fact about the island, it's said to be very haunted, and there were so many people burned on the island that the soil is 50% human remains. But that's probably just an urban legend, who knows.
Starting us off at number 10, Bannock, Montana, USA. So Bannock was founded in 1862 when John White discovered gold on Grasshopper Creek. 2 years later, it became the first territorial capital of Montana before it changed to Virginia City. At its peak, it had a population of 10,000 people. You know, quite a bit for back then. But the sheriff was accused by some of leading the ruthless band of road agents called the Innocents. Early accounts claim the gang was responsible for the murders of over 100 innocent people, though historical records account for about 8. So it's kind of iffy. The sheriff and 2 deputies were hanged without trial in Bannock in 1864. 22 individuals were accused, informally tried, and hung by the Vigilance Committee, which is the Montana Vigilantes, of Bannock and Virginia City. So the city kept going into the 1930s with a fluctuating population, but then, in the 50s, gold workings dwindled, and then Bannock was declared a state park. The last residents left in the 70s. So all that with the Wild West, and then it's a state park now. Kind of funny. On to number 9, St. Elmo, Colorado, USA. So St. Elmo is the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, and it boasts the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. So it was settled in 1878 as Forest City and officially became St. Elmo in 1880. It was a gold mining settlement, just like many on this list, and the Mary Murphy mine recovered over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. It's just a lot of gold. But it's not a complete ghost town right now since it is privately owned with part-time inhabitants as of right now. You could even say the ghosts there are part-time inhabitants too. The most famous one is Dirty Annie. Her real name was Annabelle Stark, but she got her nickname Dirty Annie after her mother passed away. Annie and her brother were left to run the hotel their mother used to run while their father was in the mines. Since their mother was harsh and strict on cleanliness, after her passing, Annie would walk around in filthy clothing with her hair in a mess as a form of quiet rebellion. But anyways, some people say they have still seen her walking around the town, just strutting her stuff, hair a mess, filthy clothes. And then those who inherited the hotel swear the hotel went cold and all of the doors slammed shut when their grandchildren were playing inside. So could that have been Dirty Annie as well? Just toying with the kids? Number 8. Bodie, California, USA. So this ghost town sprung up after William Bodie hit gold in 1859. Then from 1877 to 1882 it had more than 10,000 residents and produced over 35 million in gold and silver. Also, at one point there were reported to be 65 saloons in town in addition to brothels, gambling halls, and opium dens. Like, it was the Wild West after all, but that's a lot of saloons. But sometimes that mix of money, gold, and alcohol would lead to unexpected fatalities. Newspapers reported that townspeople would ask in the mornings, "Have we a man for breakfast?" I don't know how to do a southern accent. Anyways, that meant, did anyone get killed last night? Because that's just how it was there. But not anymore. Now there are over 200 abandoned wooden buildings in what is Bodie State Historic Park. The buildings are not restored, but preserved. So you can go see a little bit of the Wild West yourself if you want. Number 7. Cerro Gordo, California, USA. So silver was discovered in Buena Vista Peak in 1865. Its discovery brought in miners, but also unsavory characters. At one point, the death rate was 1 person per week. There was no sheriff for miles around, and even the doctor fled the town, scared for his life. Basically, it had a reputation for death. So once Union Mine closed down in 1938, the population also died down. As of right now, there is one resident, Robert de Moraes, who is coincidentally a former miner. He serves as the town's unofficial caretaker. Number 6. Cahalba, Alabama. Cahalba became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. It was once the capital, but that title was taken away. What is really interesting to me is its ghost, Peague's ghost. In 1862, the story goes that a young couple was out for a walk on a moonlit night. Romantic. As they walked behind Colonel C.C. Peake's house, a glowing ball of white light seemingly just appeared before them. It was just floating on the air. This ball would dart first on one side of the walk and then on the other, and then approach close enough to almost touch them, and then recede and disappear into the shrubbery. And then suddenly it was seen beside them floating again. So they thought the apparition was a trick or something fancy, maybe caused by the same peculiar phase of moon shadows, something like that. So they turned to retrace their steps, and then it happened again and appeared in front of them. Went through the same thing. So at this point, the man and his lady determined to test the materiality of the object, but then he tried to grab it, and then it darted just beyond his reach, disappeared, saw not again. Other people have seen it, and the glowing light, will-o-wisp, or whatever it was, from then on was known as Peague's ghost. Number 5. Kennecott, Alaska, USA. Up and to the left in Alaska is Kennecott. It was once a thriving 20th century copper mining town, and it is now desolate. From 1911 to 1938, Kennecott employed as many as 300 people in the mill town and 300 in the mines. It processed nearly $200 million worth of copper, but once the copper tapped out, the company that established the town quickly withdrew from the settlement. Kennecott Copper Corporation left abruptly and left behind their equipment, buildings, and belongings. So now the National Park Service and tour operators offer guided access to several historic buildings, including the 14-story concentration mill. That'd be something fun to see, I think. In that mill, they apparently talk about the tales of lucky fortunes, frontiersmen, and tragic endings that occurred in the remote wilderness. Number 4. Shakespeare, New Mexico, USA. Shakespeare was an old mining town that was frequented by outlaws. It was called Mexican Springs first, then Grant, and then became Ralston City when it was a mining town in 1870. When the silver started running low, the population began to run low as well. But then in 1879, before it was about to be a ghost town first time, most of the land in the city was bought by Colonel William G. Boyle. He gave the town a new start under the name Shakespeare. So apparently Billy the Kid washed dishes at a hotel there, and 2 notorious cattle raiders were captured and hung. The records state that the 2 were hung because Russian Bill stole a horse and Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. So Shakespeare closed down after a bigger town sprung up 3 miles away and the mines closed after the Depression of 1893. So it is now a historic site, preserved as a monument to the real Old West. A lot of these are out. You know, Old West. Pop up for mining, and then they're done. This is me mining now. Number 3. Burke, Idaho, USA. So mines were built in 1884 for silver and lead in Burke, and then the town was built after that. What makes this place cozy is that it is built in a canyon that at its widest measures 300 feet wide. Because of this, the railroad went directly through town and shared the way with cars. Whenever the train passed through, cars would have to pull over. When the railway expanded, it ran right through the town's hotel. A covered walkway connected 2 sides of the buildings, and it let 5 cars of the Northern Pacific Railroad pass through each day. But not everything was well and good in the cozy little town. There were tensions between the miners and the owners of the mines. In 1892, gunshots broke out between Union men and the replacement workers in the mine. The gunfight escalated and ignited a box of dynamite in one of the mills, causing 6 men to die. It got so bad that the governor of Idaho sent National Guards to Burke and declared martial law. But it didn't stop there. In 1899, when Bunker Hill Mining Company fired 17 miners for joining the Union, in response the laborers dynamited the Bunker Hill mine and more lives were lost. Then, with all of that history, plus other natural disasters like fires and avalanches, there is talk of paranormal activity in the area. Number 2. Terlingga, Texas, USA. The nickname of this town is Terlinga Ghost Town, and the motto is the Texas Ghost Town. It's also both a ghost town and not at the same time, I would say, because in the mid-1880s the discovery of cinnabar brought miners to the town, bringing the population to 2,000 people, but not much is left of those mining days. Now all that's left is a ghost town of the Chisos Mining Company and several nearby capped and abandoned mines. But also, the 2010 census set it at a population of 58 people. This is mainly due to its proximity to Big Bend National Park, so it's mainly a tourist destination. There's also reported sightings of Elvis singing at the cemetery, so it can seem like Las Vegas in the desert, I guess. More of a desert. Las Vegas isn't really a desert, you know. Last but not least, number 1, Buddville, New Mexico, USA. So Buddville was a tiny community along Route 66. It was established in 1928 by Howard Neal Bud Rice and his wife Flossie. They made many businesses and Bud cozied up to local law enforcement, but also overcharged at his auto shop and imposed fines for those caught in his speeding traps. That may have not made too many people happy. In 1967, a stranger, thought to be Billy Ray White, entered the trading post and shot and killed Bud and a part-time employee. The assailant left with $450. That day changed the nickname of Buddville to Bloodville, literally. Buddville was still occupied until 1979 when Bud's widow Flossie passed away, and so it's now a ghost town, bought and sold many times throughout the years. Even though Route 66 isn't used, it has its own exit and entrance off the interstate because he cozied up to people that much.
Coming in at number 10, we have the unreachable town of Erkhammer. Is this a true story? If so, well, I'm scared. It seems like there did indeed used to be a town by the name of Erkhammer in Iowa in the early 1900s. It was a farming town with a relatively small population. However, it was noted in the mid-1900s that it had been entirely abandoned and nobody knows why. That isn't even the scary bit either. There is a worrying story associated with the town. Whether or not it's true or false, I simply don't know, but, well, have a listen. A tourist passed through the town in the early 1950s and bought some gas at a gas station. As he drove out of town, he realized his gas tire was still on empty. Sure enough, he'd been ripped off. He turned around to confront the station workers, but he never seemed to reach the town. He was sure that he'd only been driving for 5 minutes, but after turning around for 10 minutes, he actually never made it back. Soon he ran out of gas and decided to continue back into town on foot. It was his only option really, didn't have any gas. He kept walking and saw the town in the distance, but he could never reach it. Eventually he was picked up by a passing car who said that they had not driven through a town for hours. Weird. Coming in at number 9, we have Luto Katuto. Sounds fake. In March 2018, a major landslide led to the destruction of over 100 houses, wiping away the small town of Luto Katuto overnight. Have a look at the damage. The landslide has led to Luto Katuto being dubbed the town that the earth swallowed, and it's easy to see why. Now, the cracks began appearing around 10 years before the major landslide in March 2018, but the government simply told the town residents to fill it with dirt. Town resident Giorgio Abeja spoke to the press and said that a loud noise woke him up in the night. The town was sinking. Luckily, he was able to escape with his life. The town should never have been built on the clay ground, as it was always vulnerable to landslides. Sadly, 106 families were displaced as a result of the sinking. Another town swallowed whole at number 8, we have Bayou Corny. The controversial case of Bayou Corny sinkhole has been settled with the Texas Brine Company at fault. In 2012, the town of Bayou Corny was evacuated when bubbles began rising in nearby water and there was increased seismic activity in the earth. Tim Murphy, a journalist for The Atlantic, said that Bayou Corny is the biggest ongoing industrial disaster in the United States that you haven't heard of. For some reason, nobody really talks about it. 350 residents have been turfed out of their home because their town is sinking before their very eyes. The disappearance of this town led to it being dubbed as Demon Alley. Coming into number 7, we have the New City Complex. The New City Complex was built in West Milford, New Jersey. The town was located along Route 32 and was built by the City of Newark Water and Reservoir Plant in order to provide housing for plant workers. Located along Route 23, the town is now entirely abandoned and nobody knows why, although of course there are theories. It is said that the town pretty much dissolved overnight in 1992. Rumour has it that the seeming exodus happened after a dodgy person moved to the town in the late 1980s. Others say that the town was never a town at all, just a set of a movie which has been left to crumble. So, is it an inexplicably abandoned town or an urban legend? Coming Coming into number 6, we have the Roanoke. What happened to the people of Roanoke? It is a question still baffling us 430 years later, as it seems that not one but two occasions the town actually totally disappeared. Twice! Let me start from the beginning. In 1585, a small group of settlers made Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina their home, although many left when they found the conditions to be unsatisfactory. In 1587, 115 English settlers came to join those who had left, but weirdly they found no one. Like, absolutely no one. Weirdly though, they didn't seem to be too disturbed by that, assuming they must have just upped and left because they didn't like it. At the time, the colony decided to send their governor, a John White, back to England to gather fresh supplies and fresh settlers to expand the colony. He went back, and then 3 years later he returned with his supplies to the colony. He'd left his wife and daughter there. He was expecting a big reunion, but once again, he found no traces of the inhabitants, just like the time the settlers had arrived, only this time he knew something was wrong because his family wouldn't have upped and left without telling him. The only clue he found was the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post, which is extremely strange. So where did the settlers of the Roanoke go? They were absolutely never seen again. Now some theorists say that they were killed by a Native American tribe, although the fact that there was no trace of their bodies is absolutely suspicious. Others say that they decided to sail back to England for some reason or another but got lost at sea, but again, I'm saying this town disappeared twice, so there really has to be something else going on. Coming into number 5, we have Christmas, Arizona. I love a good abandoned town, I really do. I went to Calico in California back in December 2017 and it was so interesting and spooky, but now I really want to visit this town even more. Meet the lost town of Santa Claus in Arizona. Santa Claus! The town was so popular with Christmas lovers despite its untraditional setting in the desert. The town was founded in 1937 and created as a Christmas resort, just, you know, cause. A Swiss chalet, and no I don't mean the chicken place, a Swiss themed house is what I mean, and plenty of Christmas trees, a life-size dollhouse, a Christmas themed inn. Basically kids could sit on Santa's lap all year round and they loved it. Until they didn't. Just stopped being a town. It's now abandoned by the side of the road. Instead of Christmas pies and elves, all you'll find these days are rattlesnakes, and while I love the sound of this, at the same time I feel like it would have sucked for the employees. I once worked as an elf in a toy store and I felt like I had too much Christmas, so the actual day was a bit of a letdown, so imagine that being all year. To be honest, I'm actually thinking maybe Santa Claus in Arizona is better off disappeared. Coming into number 4, we have Petra. Petra is located in southern Jordan in the Middle East and was settled in the early 9000 BCE. By the 4th century BCE, it was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra was carved into the rock, but after the Roman Empire took over the city, it started to disappear. At first, the population diminished in around the 7th and 8th centuries. Then the city became abandoned for centuries, with very little footfall due to its remote location. Petra lay forgotten and all but disappeared as a result of natural disasters and neglect. It was off the map for a very long time until Swiss explorers rediscovered the city in 1812. As stories dribbled back to Europe of a lost town, intrigue grew. Local folklore claimed that the city has been created by the Wand of Moses, having actually lost touch with the actual history of the forgotten city. In 1929, archaeologists led an excavation of the city. In 2016, even more of the city was discovered buried in the sands. Coming into number 3, we have the cities of the Amazon. When the dastardly colonists invaded swathes of the world, they brought back stories when they returned to their homelands. The Spanish returned home to regale stories of vast cities made of gold and filled with treasure along the Amazon. Some called it the City of Zed, others called it El Dorado. This led hungry explorers to seek out the cities, only when they got there, they never found them. Ever. All they found was thick jungle. The golden cities that early pioneers had spoken of became nothing but myth and legend. That was until recently. In 2010, aerial images taken by National Geographic revealed earthworks spanning 155 miles in the Amazon. As Amazonian rainforests have been cleared for agriculture, further evidence of ancient pre-Columbian movements have been found. So speaking of this somewhat mythical, we have Atlantis at number 2. So bearing in mind that a lot of of people believe that the Amazonian cities were a myth, but now it's looking like they may well have been legit, what do we think the deal with Atlantis is? It's enduring, I'll say that. Atlantis is a legendary city that is mentioned in a number of pieces of ancient Greek literature, including by the late great philosopher Plato. It is said that Atlantis was a thriving city filled with affluence and positivity. That was until it sank. Atlantis was said to have sunk in the sea in a single day and night. There's been a lot of speculation as to where that city may be. People have searched the Straits of Gibraltar between Africa and Spain and found nothing as of yet. If Atlantis was real, it would be over 11,000 years old according to our calculations. I actually do kind of have a feeling that we may one day find this lost city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Langville, Montana. This is actually utterly creepy. It really has freaked me out. I was doing some heavy research into disappeared places and towns and spaces, and Google autocomplete kept suggesting Langville, Montana disappearance. Now, it would appear at the bottom in related searches too, as would Langville, Montana incident or Langville, Montana turned inside out, which is some Stranger Things stuff if I've ever heard of it. Oddly, when I clicked the link or even searched it up in the search bar, the internet yielded absolutely no information. Not a sausage. To me, this makes things even weirder, right? Why am I being suggested a mystery town when there's no evidence of it? I'm thinking that not only did this town disappear, but its data was also expunged from the internet. Why? I love a good cover-up theory, and let me make it even better with some investigative journalism. Here is the Google trend page for Langville, Montana disappeared. As you can see, it was actually frequently searched for in July and August 2018, then a few times after. Here I've compared it to searches for me, my name. I'm not saying people Google me a lot, but I am a real person on a channel with a lot of subscribers, so it does happen. So there was a time when Langville, Montana was being Googled loads, like super loads. Again, I'm just saying, why is there no record if people are Googling it? Questions, we need answers. Alright, coming in at number 10, we have Pompeii. Pompeii is such a sad tale. As many of you are likely to know from history class, Pompeii was an ancient city near modern-day Naples in the Campania region of Italy. The issue with Pompeii that it was built at the base of Mount Vesuvius, a volcano that spilled her fury in 79 AD. The city had been in existence for thousands of years before the eruption, and by the time of its demise, it was a thriving Roman hub. The eruption covered Pompeii in 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash, burying the city but largely preserving a snapshot of Roman life. The lost city of Pompeii was rediscovered over a millennium and a half later and was excavated in the late 1800s. These days, more and more of the city is being uncovered under the ash and pumice. The area draws in 2.5 million tourists now each year who delight in the macabre history of the Roman town. Indeed, it is possible to see ash-covered corpses of bodies nearly 2,000 years old. Coming in at number 9, gone overnight, we have Chaohu. With a simple flick of an administrative wrist, the Chinese city of Chaohu disappeared overnight, which is pretty worrying. Can China just cancel cities these days? It seems so. Chaohu was a city of 4 million people and was known for housing a Han Dynasty tomb and a large freshwater lake. It seems that the Chinese government is pretty obsessed with economic statuses and statistics, and the reason that the city was effectively deleted was to adjust its borders, giving land to nearby cities to make them seem more profitable, which actually sounds kinda crazy, right? The worrying thing is though, is that there was absolutely no public consultation or official notice, and residents were only aware when they were told that they were living in new parts of old cities. So I live in Toronto, like I said, and I guess it's like waking up in Toronto and it no longer being a thing, and I'm told like, oh, you live in East Niagara now. I guess not a lot would change, but at the same time, everything would change. Weird. So weird. Okay, pinnacle of weird at number 8, we have Taured. Where is Taured? Is it a place or does it exist beyond our universe? We have talked a little bit about the man from Taured on Most Amazing a few times, but now I want to talk more about the country itself. But first, let me recap. In 1954, a man was detained at the Japanese border in Haneda. This is in Japan, and he arrived on a plane from Europe. The man was affronted at the border control officer's questions. He claimed that he was on his third business trip to Japan that year. When he was searched, he had a wallet filled with a mixture of currencies, seeming to verify his business traveler status. When he presented his passport, officials were absolutely baffled. They'd never seen a passport like this before. Asking where he was from, the man, who primarily spoke French, said he was from Taured. I'm sorry, where? Officers were absolutely baffled because, as you probably know, there is no such place. When he was asked to point to it on a map, he pointed somewhere in the locale of Andorra today. He then became confused and agitated that the map he was given didn't actually include Taured. So, was it real? Did it disappear, or did he appear from another dimension? His passport looked legitimate, but he was from the mysterious country. His passport even had stamps in it, legitimate stamps, that seemed to actually cooperate with his story. He was also carrying a checkbook to a non-existent bank branch from Taured. So I guess my question is, even if the passport and checkbook were convincing fakes, how on earth would he even have been able to get on the plane in the first place? Passports are checked at multiple times when you go to an airport, including at check-in and before you're allowed to even board. I for one have like a deep feeling that Taured is real, but where did it go? Once again I ask, is it in another dimension? Because I don't know, I think that. Speaking of other dimensions, this is crazy. At number 7, we have the Cloud City. This terrifying city in the sky appeared and disappeared within the space of a day. Chinese media went wild when thousands of residents who live in 2 different cities in the country spotted what looked like a huge floating city in the sky. Have a look and tell me what you think, like what on earth could that even be? The phenomenon was described as being a ghost city by onlookers who saw skyscrapers in the clouds. To me, I'm thinking this is another sign of a parallel universe or something. The phenomenon occurred in both Guangdong and Jiangxi, with some believing it was an alien city. The images were caught on camera for the world to see, so I have to say, what on earth or above earth is going on? Even though it looks like a city in the clouds to you and me, apparently it's an optical illusion called Fata Morgana, which is a natural mirage. That being said, hundreds of people saw this disappearing cloud city, which to me makes me think that actually there might be more to it than simple mirage. A reappearing city up next, we have Villa Epicuen. Oh my goodness, wait until you see pictures from Villa Epicuen. Villa Epicuen was a tourist resort near Buenos Aires in Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, meaning the whole town had to be abandoned. Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuen became a sunken town lost to the perilous tides. However, strangely, the waters began to recede again in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time away from the sun, leaving ghostly, chalky-looking twisted roots and leafless branches withering in the ground. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the banks, but honestly, it actually looks kinda cool in like a ghostly, scary way. Coming in at number 5, we have Angakuni Lake. This is a spooky Canadian urban legend set in the frozen north of Nunavut, one of Canada's largest and yet least populated territories. The conditions in the Arctic land are pretty terrifying at the best of times. The story goes that in the year 1930, a fur trapper, Joe LaBelle, needed to take shelter from a storm, so he decided to trek to a close-by Inuit village that he said he knew well. He'd been a few times in the past and called out a greeting ahead of his arrival, which was weirdly met with no response. When he arrived in the village, he found that its entire population had vanished. Stranger still, it appeared that inside the houses, food was still kept in stocks, and there were even some half-eaten meals on tables. It was as if everyone had fled at a moment's notice. LaBelle reported the incident to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, after months of investigation, they never found much of a trace of the residents. These days, the village can't be found at all, which has led many people to think that it simply never existed. Coming into number 4, we have Ashley. The story goes that in August 1952, the small town of Ashley in Kansas, USA, disappeared following a magnitude 7.9 on the Richter scale earthquake. The earthquake was said to have taken place at 3:28 AM, meaning the town's 679 residents were all in bed. The epicenter of the earthquake was none other than Ashley Town Center. Now, the urban legend says that when state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning crack in the earth measuring 100 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. Back in the day when we did things in yards. The depth of the hole was never determined, Many people think that the story of the disappeared town is none other than a creepypasta. Others say that there was indeed an earthquake on record in Kansas and that the town was lost, being too small to be on any maps in the first place. Honestly, I'm not sure. Coming into number 3, we have the story of Rio Verde. This is a Brazilian ghost story. Or are the legends of the disappearance of Rio Verde real? The story goes that in 1923 a group of explorers came by the village of Rio Verde in the Brazilian jungle, supposedly a town of just 600 people. It seems that the explorers were shocked to find the town utterly deserted. They looked in houses and found things in a state of sudden disarray, chairs knocked over, food still on tables, clothes still in cupboards, cars still in driveways. According to the story, police were called to the town and they found a cryptic clue. It seems that one of the townsfolk had left behind a gun that, on examination, seemed to have recently been fired. Aside the gun, there was a mysterious message that read, "There is no salvation." Some people think that the town was abandoned in order to avoid conflict with guerrilla militias, which were a problem at the time. Others think that the disappearance had something to do with religion. To this day, nobody knows. Coming into number 2, we have the crazy story of the town on fire. Did you know that there is a legitimate abandoned town in Pennsylvania that is not only empty, but has been on fire for decades? Centralia was a thriving mining town in Columbia County with a population of a few thousand. These days, just 7 remain, clinging on to their doomed homes. It seems that all was well in Centralia for a very long time. It had been an active mine since the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, since 1962, it has been burning from the inside. It is suspected that the fire started from deliberate trash burning and could well keep burning for a further 250 years, which is absolutely insane. The residents first noticed the fire when smoke began billowing from the ground, accompanied by a foul smell of burning trash. Not only that, carbon monoxide was detected seeping from the ground. With temperatures hotter than the planet Mercury, it was decided that it was too dangerous to even try putting out the flames, and as a result, the town was evacuated slowly. But many people remained living there until 1981. That was when a 12-year-old boy fell into a sinkhole that suddenly opened up in his backyard. He survived by clinging onto a tree root, but from the hole came a plume of hot steam found to contain poisonous gas. That was it for the rest of the town. These days the town is deserted save from 7 people who just won't leave, but once again, that fire still burns. Okay, are you ready for the saddest story that you'll hear today? Coming into number 1, we have Ordor-sur-Glane. This town was eradicated in one day at the merciless hands of the Nazis. During the German invasion of France in the Second World War, the village of Ordor-sur-Glane was the subject of a bloody massacre. On June 10, 1944, SS soldiers destroyed the village, killing 642 of its inhabitants. There was 1 sole survivor of the attack and 20 escapees. Now the SS invaded and rounded up men and shot them at point blank range in the barn, which actually may have been a better fate than that awarded to the women and children. They were rounded up into a church that was then set on fire by the German soldiers. You can imagine how that ended. Former French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the town remain untouched as a memorial to those who lost their lives there. Cars lay in ruins, buildings are crumbling, and shops contain what was left of their stocks after the village was ransacked. Tourists can now visit the town remains and nearby memorial centre. I'd actually love to go and pay my respects. It sounds creepy, but honestly historically really cool. I'd better watch out though, because the ransacked town is said to be haunted, and of course it is.